So we've been looking at the Nephilim. We're going to continue that on today. Um, and this is part of an ongoing series. We're going to go on it until we get finished with it, which I expect will be a little while longer. But today we're going to begin in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 39 through 40. It says, all flesh is not the same flesh, but there's one kind of flesh of men, another flesh of beasts, another of fishes, and another of birds. There are also celestial bodies and bodies terrestrial, but the glory of the celestial is one and the glory of the terrestrial is another. Now, if you read Genesis chapter 1, it shows that God created all creatures to reproduce after their own kind. They're different kinds and they should not mix. Then this passage in 1 Corinthians highlights the distinction. However, nothing in Genesis 1 makes distinction between celestial and terrestrial flesh. So Paul's statement is not that there is a distinction between celestial and terrestrial kind of flesh, but they differ in their glory. And this is a difference in status from God's perspective. It has to do with their divine attributes. Now, some have told me that since the divine beings don't have a physical body like humans do, that breeding is impossible. People say that. Well, do you believe the Bible? If you believe the Bible, then the Bible tells us differently on that. Psalm chapter 78, verses 24 through 25, and had rained down manna upon them to eat, and had given them of the corn of heaven. Man did eat angels' food, he sent them meat to the full. So this is talking about the travels in the wilderness of the children of Israel, and it says that they ate the food of angels. We can eat their food, and they can eat ours. Every angel that appears to mankind, except for the ones that appear simply in dreams or visions, but every single one of them does so in a physical body that is masculine, and they can talk, they eat, they drink, they wash, they sleep, and they partake in sexual activity. Genesis chapter 19, verses 1 through 5. And there came two angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat on the gate of Sodom. And Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them. And he bowed himself with his face toward the ground, and he said, behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and you shall rise up early, and go on your ways. And they said, nay, but we will abide in the street all night. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and entered into his house. And he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called out unto Lot, and said unto him, where are the men which came in unto thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. So the men of the city, they saw these angels, and they wanted to have sexual relations with them. Sodom was a wicked city. Most people think of the sexual depravity, but Sodom was condemned for all sorts of things. Why would they want this? Because in the past, the fallen angels had intercourse with humans and it gave them power. Now, that's a personal sin, not a national sin, at least not until it takes over the nation. But it is a sin for both the humans and for the angels, and the angels have more accountability. In the book of Jude, we're going to look at verses 6 and 7. And we're going to look more in depth at Jude in the future, but we're going to look at these two verses right now. And it says, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitations, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, unto the judgment of the great day. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah, and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication, and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. So the term first estate is their own sovereignty as sons of God. Their own habitation literally means the body as a dwelling place of the spirit. Their own habitation is being clothed with angelic glory in their angelic form. In other words, they undressed from their former state of glory in order to cohabit with women, or at least cohabit with humans. The word habitation is a Greek word that appears in only one other place in the Bible, and that's in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And we're going to read verses 1 through 5. For we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, and a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our house, and this is our same word here, but desiring earnestly to be clothed upon with our house, which is from heaven. If so be that being clothed we shall not be found naked. For we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened, not for that we would be unclothed, but clothed upon, that mortality might be swallowed up of life. Now he that hath wrought us for the selfsame thing is God, who also hath given unto us the earnest of the Spirit. So this is the same word, but the roles are reversed. In this passage, humans are to have the glorified form of angels. One day we're all going to have that at the second coming of Christ. Well, this word refers to the type of body that each is given, whether human or angel. It's a dwelling. This is the place from which we are to represent and glorify God. Both angels and humans are to do this. Now, some of the angels disrobed from their glorious state in order to cohabit with women and with men, apparently. So when it comes to the glorification and power that's involved, we see the nature of the chains that God uses as judgment of these angelic beings. Darkness. Darkness is contrasted to glory. Glory is described as brightness, and darkness is the opposite of it. So these chains of darkness are not literal metal chains, but they represent a limitation of the physical manifestation of glory. In other words, the fallen angels are now prevented from using their full capabilities. This is not with physical chains of steel, but it's a limitation of their glory. God's stern judgment prevented a repeat performance. One of the angels, if you read the book of Enoch, the angels say, come on, do it. It'll be fun. And the other angels say, not a chance. I saw what happened to you. And this only happened one time, at least in this manner. Now, we do know they have multiple incursions, but only one time did they come about this way. It says they're going after strange flesh. This word strange is from the Greek word hetero, which means flesh of a different kind. It's not homosexuality. This means flesh of a different kind. It says they were going after strange flesh, and this is flesh of a different kind. The angels who rescued Lot, they were the intended sexual advances of the men of Sodom. On the surface, it seems that they're homosexual until we realize that in the underlying text that they were seeing sexual union with angels. Male angels, but still angels. They weren't looking at it as sex with men, but as angels. The men of Sodom knew that they were not the same kind of flesh. Now, the sins of Sodom are much, much worse than this. I mean, this is bad enough, but it goes much deeper than that. We're not going into that here because it's not part of this study, but suffice it to say that the national sins were just as bad, if not worse, than the individual sins that we're looking at. So why is this so? And it's apparent that Lot was able to tell that they were angels. Therefore, the men of Sodom would also be able to make that distinction. There's something about them that they could tell was different. The men of Sodom knew that they were messengers of God, and they wanted strange flesh, not same flesh. The angels look similar to men because they're called men in some places, but they're somehow discernibly different. So these angels, while they're on earth, they have earthly bodies. They walked and they talked like men. They could be understood by men. They ate, they drank, they slept, and they had the ability to have sexual relations just like men. They could apparently breed with women. But should they? So God commanded that every animal should reproduce after its kind, and obviously that would exclude creatures with a celestial flesh. Angels are apparently genetically compatible for reproduction, but the offspring were not human. They were giants. Physically, they were capable of interbreeding with human women, but morally, this was a deliberate act of rebellion against God. Jesus tells us that they don't do these things, that they cannot do these things, or they should not do these things, but they do them anyway. So the angels in heaven have chosen rightly to not do these things. They kept their first estate. They stayed where they're supposed to be. Job chapter 4, verse 18 says, behold, he put no trust in his servants, and his angels he charged with folly. Now, as we look back several months ago, when you see the word folly in the Old Testament, it always has to do with sexual wickedness. So he charged his angels with sexual wickedness. Job chapter 15, verse 15, behold, he putteth no trust in his saints, his holy ones. Yea, the heavens are not clean in his sight. Zephaniah 1:8. And it shall come to pass in the day of the Lord's sacrifice that I will punish the princes and the king's children and all such as are clothed with strange apparel. So both Job and Zephaniah speak of the coming judgment of angels because of their sin. Now, like I said, the word folly, the modern world generally uses as something that's foolish. When you say that's a folly, you're saying that's stupid. In the Old Testament, it's important to remember that it refers specifically to sexual abominations where two different types are mixed against the will of God. It has to do with impropriety. The Septuagint translates Job 4:18 as this is obviously an English translation of it, but whereas he trusts not in his servants and perceives perverseness in his angels. So folly always has to do with sexual wickedness in the Old Testament. Now, from the context of the story, it seems that the people of Sodom may have thought that these two angels might provide the means by which they could incite a second incursion of angel-human hybrids and create another line of Nephilim. And you have to understand the people of Sodom were really messed up people. People you don't want to be living next door to. When you ask why Sodom was destroyed, they usually say for their homosexual behavior. But I'm not so sure that's why they were destroyed. It was a sin, but I'm not sure that's why they were destroyed. Ezekiel chapter 16, verses 49 through 50. Behold, this was the iniquity, or this was the lawlessness of thy sister Sodom. Pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. And they were haughty and committed abomination. They committed idolatry before me. Therefore I took them away as I saw good. It says that they were lawless. They were proud. They were arrogant. They had so much food that they didn't have to work for it. They were idle or they were lazy because they didn't have to work. With all this abundance, they didn't help the poor and needy. And in fact, if you look at the secular history behind Sodom, they would go so far as to make it a crime to help the poor. And they would watch the poor starve to death for sport. That was entertaining to them. And if you dared to help that person, they were going to kill you too, because they wanted to watch this person starve to death. That's the kind of people they were. They were arrogant. They committed idolatry. And this word abomination is a Hebrew idiom for idolatry. And Colossians 3:5 tells us that covetousness is idolatry. And covetousness is wanting that which rightfully belongs to another, and you'll go to any means to get it. There's nothing wrong with wanting something new, but what position does that hold in your life? It can become a problem. But these people were haughty and they did abominable things. Sodom was full of luxuries, and the people were very prosperous, yet they did not help the poor. They made it a crime to help the poor. And this doesn't mean that they simply didn't redistribute money to the poor. There's no place in the Bible where we're commanded to do that. But they created an atmosphere in which the poor and needy were openly and actively oppressed. Homosexuality is not mentioned here. Homosexuality is a personal sin and not a national sin, unless, of course, the nation embraces and promotes it, which would then make it a national sin. But for the sins that are listed here, Sodom was destroyed. And do you see these things going on in the world today? But for the sins that are listed, Sodom was destroyed. These people are going after strange flesh, a different kind of flesh. They didn't have to do that because the giants were already there. To reread these verses here in Jude. And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, unto the judgment of the great day. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. So what is their first estate? Throughout the Bible, we see that different heavenly beings have different positions. Certain sons of God participate in God's divine counsel in Job chapter 1 through 2. And they make decisions, and they execute God's will, and they communicate messages from God. It is not that God's incapable of doing these things, but that he wants the fellowship. In the book of Daniel, these heavenly beings are called watchers. Daniel chapter 4, verse 17. This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, the watchers, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. So these watchers in Daniel, they decide to make a strange fate befall King Nebuchadnezzar in order that he can learn a lesson about arrogance and pride. Nebuchadnezzar was the most powerful person in the world at that time, but God, the Most High, needs to be recognized as sovereign. The Most High is the supreme being. He's the God above all gods. He's the King of kings. He's the Lord of lords, and he's above this king. He's above Nebuchadnezzar. So the watchers decided upon a course of action, and the Most High agreed and enacted it. And Daniel chapter 4 is important because it was written by Nebuchadnezzar himself personally as a testimony of his experience of the God of Israel. As far as I know, that's the only place in the Bible that's written by somebody who's not Jewish, or at least a Jewish proselyte. But Nebuchadnezzar, by his own hand, wrote this in Daniel. He writes using Aramaic language because he's not an Israelite. It's in the Mesopotamian context that they're referred to as watchers, and the Jewish texts that were put together during or after Babylonian captivity, such as First Enoch, did the same thing. In other words, watchers is still angels, but it's from the Aramaic language and it carried over into the Jewish culture. So Nebuchadnezzar writes as a non-Israelite and he uses Aramaic terminology. And these beings are referred to as watchers only in this Mesopotamian context. And elsewhere in the book of Daniel, they're referred to as princes. In Daniel chapter 10, verses 13 through 14, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days, for yet the vision is for many days. In the New Testament, divine beings who are being obedient to God are generally just referred to as angels. And that rolls them all into one category instead of separating them out by their job. Therefore, in the New Testament, angels are more than just divine messengers. Angels have a teaching ministry. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 14 is talking about angels. And are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for them who shall be heirs of salvation? Then chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. Therefore, we ought to give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest at any time we should let them slip. For if the word spoken by angels was steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received a just recompense of reward, how shall we escape if we neglect so great salvation, which at the first began to be spoken by the Lord, and was confirmed unto us by them that heard him? God also bearing them witness, both with signs and wonders, and with divers miracles, and gifts of the Holy Spirit, according to his own will. For unto the angels hath he not put in subjection the world to come whereof we speak. So this present world that we're in right now is subject to the rule of angels. The world to come is not. In the New Testament, angels have a teaching ministry, but they also had one in the Old Testament that you don't see very often. Here in the book of Acts, this is chapter 7, verses 38 and 52 to 53. This is he that was in the church in the wilderness with the angel which spake to him in the Mount Sinai, and with our fathers, who received the lively oracles to give unto us, which of the prophets have not your fathers persecuted? And they have slain them which showed before of the coming of the just one, of whom you have now the betrayers and murderers, who have received the law by the disposition of angels and have not kept it. So keep in mind that the teaching ministry of angels was not always good. Not all angels are good. Sometimes they taught man to be evil. Galatians chapter 1, verse 8. But though we, or an angel from heaven, preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. The New Testament rolls them all into one lump. You don't know who's good, who's bad, except by context. But this is why Paul taught not only about the transgressions of humanity, but he also taught about the transgressions of angels. In Galatians chapter 3, verse 19, wherefore then serveth the law? It was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come to whom the promise was made, and it was ordained by angels in the hand of a mediator. So in the book of Jubilees, which was written during the Second Temple period, we're told that the teaching ministry of angels went too far. They were supposed to teach men righteousness, but they went too far and taught things that were forbidden. They taught the arts of cosmetics, and they taught seduction, which was used to tempt the sons of God to fall into sexual sin with human women. Later, they taught men warfare and weaponry. And these writings placed responsibility for the angelic fall on Azazel, who was the chief teacher, even above Semahaza, who taught warfare and weaponry. Now, the book of Jubilees is commentary on the Bible and is not equal to the scriptures. It makes commentary on it, but in Genesis 6, there's no chronology that is given of the various sins of the watchers. Genesis also does not name individuals, but roles of the angelic fall into one single event that shares blame. But you can get more information if you read Genesis 4 closely. So the Bible is full of boring genealogies. It's got big long lists and things like that. But those things are there for a reason. In Genesis 4, we're given the story of Cain and his descendants. Lamech is the seventh generation, and his family is given in great detail. Lamech is known for polygamy, murder, boastful arrogance, and pride. He's a king who can do as he pleases. Even his name is a play on the word for king. His sons are known for the technological advances that they introduce to the world. Lamech's daughter, Naamah, is mentioned for no apparent reason, at least not apparent until you look at her name. Her name, Naamah, means loveliness or pleasantness. She's mentioned for her beauty. And if you think back to Genesis 6, why did the angels fall? Verses 1 and 2, and it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair. These women were hot, and the angels saw the beauty of the daughters of men and lusted after them, and Naamah was just such a woman. So Genesis chapter 4, verses 19 through 24. And Lamech took unto him two wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. And Ada bare Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. And Lamech said unto his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech. For I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. So Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 and 2 again. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. So Lamech's children were beautiful, and they were talented, and they were industrious. So Lamech became proud and arrogant. And during the time of Lamech's sons, there was a technological explosion, and it was the result of the fallen angels on earth. These fallen angels wanted the human women, and for their dowry, Lamech got kingship, protection, and the knowledge of technology for his sons. Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 through 22. Then came Peter to him and said, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times? And Jesus saith unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. So when Peter asked Jesus how many times a man should forgive his brother, Jesus replied with the same number that Lamech mentioned for vengeance. And this seems to have given Peter the connection between the sins of these angels and the restorative work of Christ. So when we look at Seth's lineage and compare the 7th in his line, corresponding to the approximate time that Lamech lived, we see Enoch. Enoch's father was Jared, which means they shall come down. Who shall come down? The fallen angels. Now, these angels, they didn't literally fall from heaven. Using the word up for heaven is a way to describe the unreachable divine realm. It doesn't mean that heaven is literally up high from the ground, but that it could not be attained by humans. Even giants can't reach that high. For them to interact with humans, the angels had to already be on earth. They did not literally fall from heaven, but they lost their glorified form that made them able to access the divine realm. Just as Adam was evicted from the mountain of Eden, the angels were fallen from their place. And by the same manner of speaking, Enoch was taken to be with God. Genesis chapter 5, verses 21 through 24. And Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. There's nothing said about his death. Most Bibles translate this passage in a way that obscures the final verse. The word Elohim appears twice in this final verse here. It's a word that's used for spiritual entities, and it's plural. When the Bible refers to Yahweh, it's used because he is the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which is three persons with one essence. Plural is used because of that. But when the plural is not used of Yahweh, it refers to multiple separate entities. So how do we know when the word refers to God's plural as opposed to God, three-part Yahweh? It's the verb form that goes with it. So in this passage, the verb walked is plural and the Hebrew grammar, but the verb took is singular. This means that the correct way to read verse 24 is, and Enoch walked with God's, and he was not, for God took him. God the Father took him. That really makes things clear as mud. But it really does change things. It's not yet very clear, but it does change things. So when it says that Enoch walked with God, which is an expression that means living in a godly manner for 300 years. However, before he was taken, according to this passage, Enoch was in close contact with beings who are referred to as gods. This, given the context, is the sons of God. So Enoch's removal when he was taken was not the end of his existence. It doesn't even necessarily mean that he went to heaven. If God took Enoch to be where God is, where's the last place we saw God in this narrative? He was in Eden. Eden is the earthly place where God once held his counsel, but there's heavenly access there as well. It's protected from our entering into it, but the way is still open. There's an angel there with a flaming sword to protect the way. Keeps men out, but it protects the way. It keeps it open. So the idea of God taking Enoch shows the change of function for Enoch. The Septuagint says he was translated. The word is used in the New Testament to mean change. This is why it says he was not. He became inaccessible to mankind. He had entered the presence of God, where he now has another role to play, and this role is a prophetic role. Jude, verses 14 and 15. And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of their ungodly deeds, which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against them. So now that he has witnessed the abode of God, he is qualified as a prophet. And the very fact that it pleased God to bring him into the garden, contrasting to the exile of Adam, Adam was kicked out, he brought Enoch in, tells us that Enoch was a worthy ambassador for God. Now, Enoch was a human being that could represent God before the gods with little g. So the God with a capital G could be represented by Enoch before the gods with a little g. His job was to prophesy to the angelic sons of God. He was not taken because he had done something wrong, but because he was welcomed in. Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 5. By faith, Enoch was translated that he should not see death, and was not found, because God had translated him. For before his translation, he had this testimony that he pleased God. Now, no one believed that Enoch was completely without sin. In the story, we're told that Enoch walked with God after the birth of his son, but it tells us nothing about his life before that point. The apocryphal book of Sirach, chapter 44, verse 16, tells us that Enoch was considered an example of repentance. Well, if you have to repent, that means that that means that he was probably not walking with God for the first 65 years of his life. Only Jesus Christ lived without sin. So Genesis 5 begins with Adam, who was the man that God created, then put into and then taken out of the Garden of Eden. Then it ends with Noah, the man who later survived the flood and recreation of the earth and then planted a garden. In Genesis 5, we see a parallel with Eden, and that Enoch was raptured to Eden. Enoch did not simply not die, neither did he simply go to heaven. Enoch took a job on the divine council on earth. Nothing is said of his death because he went to the place where the tree of life was accessible to him. And one day we will have that tree of life accessible to us. Every believer has the opportunity to please God as Enoch did, but we fail. We don't faithfully represent God as well as we should, neither before man or before the angelic sons of God. We need Christ to intercede for us. And when we sin, and we will sin, but when we sin, we have to appropriate the shed blood of Jesus Christ as an intercession. Enoch was not perfect, but God had a role for him as a representative of humanity. The sons of God in Genesis 6 are angelic beings. We've seen that in the Bible. So who are the daughters of men? That one's a little bit simpler. The Hebrew word Adam is translated as men, and that means simply that the text refers to ordinary human women who are descended from Adam. The phrase sons of God does not appear often, and it's very specific in its context. The term daughters of men is not specific in context, it's a general word. They're human women in general. So the incursion of angels into our world resulted in a race of giants upon the earth, and we can see that from the plain wording in Genesis 6. And as long as we have a clear understanding of the groups involved in the event, we'll be able to see that clearly. These scenes continue to affect our lives today. We need to let the Bible speak for itself and to shape our theology instead of letting our non-spiritual outlook or our man-made traditions shape our theology. The Bible shows a relationship between angels and human women, and that relationship shaped much of the history of the early church. And today, we try to hide that, or we try to change it to something much less spiritual that doesn't sound as weird. However, the truth is that the offspring of these unions are what we call giants. Now, this is not the kind of giants such as in fairy tale books, but they're giants nonetheless. They're the Nephilim. And their presence is once again making itself known in our world today. And who were these giants in the past? Who are they today? Are you prepared for this? There's a war coming. And this war is going to be both physical and spiritual. The physical war will be difficult. It's going to be bad. But the spiritual war can be won if you're prepared. And will you yourself be prepared? Will you be an overcomer? Or will you be overcome? We're commanded to be overcomers, but we have to apply ourselves to it. Are we doing that?